Hello everybody, it's Richard here, back again for some more of the story. So let's get back to that walled city and wait for the storyteller. And here he comes. He's picking at his teeth. Maybe he's spent a long time over breakfast. Now he sits down and says, I bet you're all wondering where that cat went when it jumped onto the quayside and disappeared into the seaside town. And I will tell you, but the king is on the back of a camel with 12 brigands in the middle of a desert. So I'd better tell you first what happened to him. Yes, says the storyteller. Wearing dirty old clothes, dressed like a beggar, not a king anymore. Sitting on a camel with the clanking pots and pans and the shifting weight of the bales of cloth and the rolls of carpet. And they're setting across the desert. That camel train, the king and 12 brigands. The king still wants to know what he should do. He still wants to find the source of the wind, and he still wants to find and know why has everything happened the way it has. But as they walk through the desert on the camels, the king sees that in the distance a crowd is gathering. There's a well and some palm trees and camels tethered, and people have laid out carpets. It's a market. There are wares piled up on those carpets and people moving between them, examining them and chatting to one another. And the brigand chief turns to the king and says, Now then, beggar, take all that off the camel, lay it out. And so the king, who is now a beggar, slithers off the camel, takes the great load of pots, pans and carpets and staggers towards the market, lays them all out, puts them neatly on the carpet, sits down, and now the brigands are already spreading through the market looking, and the brigand chief says, Know this, beggar, this is a market of thieves. Never ever tell anyone where this is, all right? And one more thing, he says, if anybody asks you what you want in exchange for those, tell them you want a wooden horse. You've got that? The king nods, and the brigands spread through the market, and a crowd gathers round the king's carpet, and he can't help noticing there are sharp-eyed looks, there are sneaky expressions, and everyone, man and woman, has a dagger at their belt. And someone points at one of the plates on the carpet and says, What's that? And the king picks it up and thinks, and suddenly he has an idea. He's going to tell a story. And he waves the plate around and says, well, this plate, I personally stole this plate in an audacious act, yes, from the Emperor of the Western Isles. There were gasps. Yes, says the king, I disguised myself as a gigantic candle, and I was placed in his chambers, and at night I emerged from the candle, and I stole this plate. There was applause. What about that one, says somebody else. And the king, now picking up a scimitar, curving and sharp, says, this one I used to demonstrate supreme skill and to wave it and waft it over the head of the Empress of the Western Isles when it was raining in such a way that I intercepted every single raindrop and her head remained dry, and she had it gold-plated in my honour. More applause. The king was enjoying himself, and then somebody said, Well, what do you want for them then? And the king said, I want to know where the wind blows from." And now they laughed, shook their heads, and walked away. But one person remained. It was a little old lady, grey-haired, lined face, bright eyes. And she looked up at the king and looked him up and down, and she said, "You want to know where the wind comes from? That's easy. Just climb the glass mountain." "What?" says the king. "Where's the glass mountain?" "Oh," says the old lady, "it's over there." And now the king looks up for the first time, looks up from the carpet, looks up from all the faces round him, looks up and sees in the distance, gleaming like one gigantic diamond, is a mountain. The little old lady whispers. She says, "Climb it, slide down the other side, and you will find the answer to your questions. Go now, quickly." And the king doesn't think. He sets off at once, in his hobnail boots, running through the sand, falling and stumbling and rising again and running. And as he runs, he sees the mountain getting nearer, and he runs, and there it is. He's standing next to it and gazing into it. It's glowing with a strange pink inner glow. There are so many facets and so many sharp edges, and he begins to climb it, pushing his hobnail boots into the gaps and the crevices and pulling with his fingers. Sometimes his hands are cut, but he doesn't care. He climbs to the top. Then he looks over and he sees that there's a sheer descent on the other side. The glass is smooth, and he swings his legs over and he lets himself go. Sliding and gliding, picking up speed, slipping. And as he slips, he cries out, "Wah!" And down at the bottom, the glass mountain rose up a little bit and choom, shot him up into the air. And he flew for a little bit and splash down into a pond with such force that he sank beneath the waters. His clothes became heavy and he was dragged down, bubbles out of his nose, swimming and thrashing, and the weeds grabbed at his feet and he kicked to make himself free, and he drove up to the surface and pulled himself onto dry land and lay there, sopping wet. Breathing in the fresh air, the blue. Slowly he got to his feet and looked at the surface of the water, because he'd noticed something as he nearly drowned. Lying on the bottom of the pond, on its side, was a wooden horse. And he noticed something else. The wind was blowing with such force. It seemed to be coming from over the brow of a hill. And he ran up the little path until he got to the top of the hill, shivering, with his coat so wet and his trousers dripping with water. And he looked down, and he beheld a valley filled with light and trees. And at the bottom of the valley he saw a huge tower, and it seemed to be from that tower that the wind was blowing. And he began to walk down the valley. "Yes," said the storyteller, "that's quite an adventure for someone who never left his castle before. But I've got to go," he said. Things to do. Meet me here tomorrow, and I'll tell you what happened when the king got to the tower. And, he said, I haven't forgotten the cat. So until then, goodbye.